Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing soul coming to us from across the pond, from England. We have Steve Aspin on board today. Steve Aspin is the author of the book Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. In Out of Time, Steve Aspin attempts to write a crossover work about the enduring worldwide reports of alien abduction. It is intended for both those familiar with the historic published case material and the curious reader unfamiliar with the decades of serious research on this superficially improbable phenomenon. He has at all times attempted to approach the subject with critical thoroughness and intellectual rigor. From stumbling upon a cattle mutilation in Ireland in 1970 to witnessing a UFO after a period of missing time at the age of 16 near Chester in 1972, Steve relates a lifetime of anomalous experiences in his book. But this is only the starting point of the journey that the reader will make. Steve then details several years of investigation into the subject and how what he has learned has shaped his thoughts on what is happening to perhaps millions of people worldwide. He had the good fortune to meet with several leading researchers in the field, including Bud Hopkins and Dr. David Jacobs, and read hundreds of published works on the subject of UFOs and abductions. He has attempted to bring hard evidence to the discussion and to follow that evidence wherever it may lead. So, Steve, thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. I'm really honored that you agreed to come on. Now, regarding your story, before we get into your actual story, could you get into your family's history? If anything happened to them, and if you maybe could talk about where you grew up.
Well, I was born in 1956, and my family were a conventional, in many ways, middle class family. But my mother was always interested in spiritualism and the supernatural, and she was kind of only superficially interested in it all, but she was very, very drawn towards this. So my childhood was punctuated with, Sassaniding seances and stuff, and that she'd had friends around her that read palms and did this and that. But my interest in that side of life was very, very low at that time. My father was a career academic who eventually became professor of French at Liverpool University, and then in his early 40s, he became a full-time bookseller and moved to a small town where the old town specialized in selling books. He became quite well known in that location, and he had a international reputation as an expert in this particular brand of French literature. So it was within that kind of academic environment that I was nurtured. And I went to conventional schools, and at 16 I went to a college of further education to do advanced level studies. And at 18 I went to University of Southampton, where I studied for a bachelor's degree in English and qualified in 1977, summer 77. So, and then I had a career in marketing and sales management from my mid 20s, and I ended up incorporating and being the sole director and shareholder of an international company that specialized in designing and manufacturing surgical equipment. So and then I retired at age 62, which is some years ago. And I've moved with my wife to the Lincolnshire Wolds, and we live a very quiet life now. And I wrote the book after being nailed into it for years. People would tell me, you really ought to record all this stuff, that. And because by then I'd linked up with Bud Hopkins and became a personal friend of his for a number of years. And I linked up with Professor David Jacobs at Temple University, and I worked with him for 7 years, and I met hundreds of people who were involved in this field of study, mainly at UFO events, but the network grows, as you get drawn into it. So I was urged to write the book, and I did publish it in September 22, and there's the logo on the poster on the wall there. So that's broadly, but the main reasons why I got attracted into this field and this field of UFO studies is the experiences I had as a child and as a young adult, which, the book is full of, but what I tried to do in the book is introduce the subject, not as just my personal story, but I have mounted a 15-year investigation into what the alien abduction issue is about and who it happens to and why. And it's become my firm conviction that it's an intergenerational phenomenon, which is what explains the behavior patterns and the interests that I described to you about my mother. And she was a lifelong abductee, and her mother before her was a lifelong abductee. And the reason I know this was at age 11 or thereabouts, or age 12, no older than that, because I know the house we lived in. I remember the circumstances of this. I asked one of the abductors in the middle of an abduction, because you can talk to them in your mind, they communicate with you telepathically. And I asked him why this was happening to me, why this happened every few weeks. And I'm pretty sure it didn't happen to my friends, and I was almost certain it didn't happen to everybody. But at the same time, I was almost certain that I wasn't unique, and it must be me and other people, because I met other people during these incidents. And he said to me telepathically, with his hands back to me at the time, he said to me, "Oh, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother, and you're next." And I could make absolutely no sense of this information until I was 50 years old, which is when I started to put it all together. But it was a throwaway line, but they tell you things sometimes that they believe you will forget, because that there's a staring procedure that they do where they lock into the optic nerve in one of your eyes, and they travel into, and they bury the experience in your long-term memory. They've got neurological mechanism to do this, and pretty much most always abductees, with very rare exceptions, don't remember their abductions in detail. They remember parts of it, or the initiation of it, or the conclusion of it, and they have to train themselves to access the long-term memory, which is where the abductors store the experience. So this is why abductees always describe a period of missing time. They describe, they say something like, a couple of abductees said to me, we were in the car and we saw this really bright light in the sky. This is in the United States. I met these people, and they said, and it got bigger and bigger, and we stopped the car to take a better look at it. That's a very typical thing to say. And the next thing we knew, it was 2 hours later, and we felt something really weird had happened, really strange had happened, really kind of important had happened, but neither of us could remember anything, and it was just 2 hours later. And people say this all the time. So there is a neurological mechanism whereby the abductors deliberately bury the experience in the part of the memory that you don't access in a short-term memory. As an example, if you try to remember what happened when you're 2.5 years old or 3 years old on a particular day in a particular situation, you probably can't remember it. You probably can't immediately recall it to mind. But that's where they put it, in that part of the memory. That's where they store it, and they know how to do this. Their knowledge of human neurology and neurological function is astoundingly accomplished. It's very advanced, and I don't know whether all sentient organisms of this level, that we are, have this as similar brain functions, but they certainly know about humans and exactly how to manipulate. in these ways. And, they do that so that you don't remember what happened. You don't put it together. And there's a reason why they do that, because I think, the whole operation, which involves hundreds of millions of people, is quite covert, and they may be quite benign eventually, but they don't want us to know what we're doing most of the time.
Now, well, you talked about the fact that your family, at least your grandmother, great grandmother, and your mom also were abductees. But did they ever knew that they were abducted?
Well, it's to do with the paradigms you put on it. M- my mother put it down as spiritualism, the beings in the afterlife. She talks about they as they were here last night, and they took things from the house, and they was really, their behavior was really weird. And she's kind of baffled and been used by them, but she knew she was other beings were interacting with her, and they knew that she knew that they had a physical presence. It wasn't just spirits. That she could tell the difference between the spiritual world and the spirit world and these beings, because they're physically interacting with it. She knew that. And my grandmother was born in 1908, and she grew up in a Yorkshire farming community. And she, in those days, there was no TV, there was no internet, there was radio, but not everybody had a radio. In 1900s, and she very rarely. I mean, she had a very basic education, left school at 12 or 13, and so she could read, but she didn't. I mean, there were newspapers, but she didn't really engage with them, and she lived a very simple life and had a very she's a very, very good woman, but she had a very simple outlook on life, and she had no familiarity with the concept of extraterrestrial life or flying saucers, or there's the UFO subjects kind of exploded in the world in the 1940s, pretty after 1947. After the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and all the U.S. government's engaging with it in a public debate, and they fly overs over Washington D.C. and several. All this became world news after 1947, but she had no connection with that. She just didn't put down her experiences as anything at all related to that. Neither did Vermont, neither did I, until midlife, when I began to suspect that was the agency responsible for this. I mean, prior to that, I just thought it was something ancestral, something to do with fairy world, something to do with the folk, memories and so forth. And I had no idea that it had anything to do with aliens or extraterrestrial life whatsoever. And my grandmother was of that mind until she passed away in 1968. At age 60, she died of a heart attack. And we rarely discuss it once, this whole thing, when I asked her, what were these things that happened to me at night? I was like 9 or 10 then, or 11, no more than that. These things that happened to me at night, where I felt that I was taken in my sleep and physically moved, and I couldn't move muscle, and I was like paralyzed. And these creatures were around me, which had a very unpleasant smell, and due with really, really quick ways of moving, and they talk to you in your mind. And I knew they took me somewhere and brought me back. And she just said, "Oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies. They do that. They'll always bring you back. Don't worry." And she just fitted it into her paradigm of their worldview, that these were pixies, and it happens to everybody, or it happens to most people. And kids had to do was ask you about it, and you just tell them what about it. And she didn't think they were in any way sinister or anything, but she also didn't think you could control this or had anything that you could do to resist it. You just had to tolerate it and go with it. That was her paradigm. So she had other incidents hacked to her as well, but we probably won't go into those not on a single interview, because there's loads of material about me and my studies and my journey that are more pertinent, I think.
Well, regarding pixies, fairies, angels, and demons nowadays, now that we know of the term screen image or screen memories, how much of those could actually be related to ETs? So it's a fascinating subject that I'd love to.
Open question. Yeah, yeah, that's an open question. I don't.
Um, so okay, so you got taken as a kid, but you also had these weird nosebleeds.
Yeah, yeah, noticeably between age 7 and 9, but they've also increased. They've also been there another. There's one in 2022, which lasted 24 hours. Um, when I was 8 years old, the school called my parents in to discuss with them the fact that I was getting nosebleeds in lessons and blood was dripping on a page when I was writing on, and they couldn't stop it. They said there was this folk tale, this remedy of putting a cold something down your back. I was supposed to help, but it didn't. And so my parents took me to an ENT specialist, and I don't that's ear, nose, and throat, and inner word bleeding out, the same designation in Canada or in the US. And he did some tests and looked at my nose, and I don't know if any X-rays were taken. I suspect not. And he had no solution, to be honest. He didn't even prescribe anything. He just said he'll grow out of it. Yeah, he'll just grow out of it because this happens to kids sometimes. He'll grow out of it, and that was the end of the medical consultation. Um, so and now I know that they were doing procedures, and they go at one nostril or the other, and occasionally both. And there's there area around the nasal pharynx with the cribriform place where the olfactory nerve enters the brain, and that's where they site some implants. And I know that that's what they were doing. I know now. I didn't know then. No idea about that. But I know now that's all that. I have a very, very strong suspect. And there was something that happened to me in 2022 when I was actually writing out of time. I had a bit of a head cold. It was in the early spring. It was about March time. And I just went into the bathroom and just coughed into the wash basin, and a huge blood clot came out and splattered on the side of the basin, which almost never happened. I mean, never for 30, 40 years. And because I'd had pneumonia and all sorts, in my life in China, I had pneumonia once for 24, for the best part of 2 years before it cleared up. So I had serious respiratory infections, but never coughed up blood like that. And inside this blood clot was this little seed size thing, and I could see it. And I was consumed with a mania to flush it down the basin. So I turned both taps on and made sure tons of cold water went in and flushed it away. And I reasoned to myself that the reason I did that was because I didn't want my wife to see it, because she'd have to be straight down the emergency room. And I had a feeling that wasn't the right thing to do. That I was, and so I rationalized to myself with a mania about flushing this thing away. And it was only the next morning, because the blood continued to ooze down each nostril. And even if you roll a piece of tissue paper up and put it up your nose, there's blood on both sides, And so I knew it was still oozing out. And I just knew very suddenly, 12 hours later in the morning, the bleeding had gone so long. And I just knew that it was an implant that had cocked up, and had flushed it down the basin, and it gone into the septic tank, and there's no possibility of retrieving it. So that's why I flushed it down the basin. Otherwise, I would have had it analyzed, and because I've got a section in Out of Time where an implant is analyzed by a company called Neutron Star Nanotechnology in Southern California, and it's an extremely detailed analysis. It's good for 40 pages, And I knew by then about about the implants and where they site them and how we know that they're not terrestrial, because the isotopic layers of the metals in the implants are not terrestrial in origin. So I knew about that, and somehow when I coughed this thing up, I didn't connect the two things together, and I just thought, oh God, if my wife sees that, she'll have me straight down the emergency room. Yeah, thinking I've got lung cancer or something. So I didn't. So I was glad to get rid of it, and it was only later that I realised. And I had an email exchange with Robert Hastings, who's a very good friend of mine and a friend of ours, and Bob Jacobs, who co-wrote a US Air Force guy, an officer they co-wrote a book together called I can't even remember. It's about their abduction experiences. I just can't remember the title of the book. Is Hastings and Jacobs, and it's an extremely detailed book about their own experiences, and they co-wrote it 50-50. And so I had a dialogue with them, the three of us, about whether this might have been implants, and you know how. I mean, there's nothing to be done. Once you've flushed it into the septic tank, it's going to stay there until the tank's bugged out. You're never going to find it. So it's a thing the size of a pinhead. You're never going to find it. So don't even imagine you will. But about 5 weeks later, in April, they put it back. And I know they put it back because in the morning, I woke up extremely irritated and agitated. And there was an abduction event overnight, which I was only dimly aware about. I felt an enormous amount of irritation, and I had a pain up here and down here somewhere. And I again noticed my nostrils bleeding. This is 5 weeks after the bleeding stopped, and I knew they put another one in. Yeah.
I believe your mother also had nosebleeds.
She reported to me that she had them as a girl. She didn't have them as an adult. No. So I know, saw them. Because she was almost 21 years old. No, she was still a young mother, but she was way past the nosebleeds, by then. But she did tell me when I was going through these nosebleeds at age 8, 9, that she'd had them as a kid.
So growing up, you had your mom as a go-to person to talk about your experiences, but did you ever share with colleagues or friends?
No, this experience in 1972, which I use as a prologue for Out of Time. I'd just tell you about that for a couple of minutes. I had on the 20th of July, 1972. It was a long, hot summer between when I left school and started college, and I was working in agricultural nursery this summer, and I worked 6 days every day except Saturday. So I worked Sunday because there's double money. But on Saturday I used to sleep in and get up late, and there was one day off. And this happened in Cheshire. We lived in Cheshire at the time, West England, and near the city of Chester. And I had this very strange knowing that I was to get up early the next Saturday. This is 2 days later than this initial thought. And because I had to go somewhere and be somewhere. So on the Saturday morning, July the 22nd, 1972, and I know that day because I've checked it out in calendars over the years. I got up at about 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. And I got my clothes on and just walked out the door, and it's quiet neighborhood and suburban neighborhood. Saturday morning, nobody around at 5:30 in the morning. And I walked. I didn't really know what I was doing or why. I just found myself walking towards there's a road about 400 meters away, and then there's another road, and I just walked down this other road. There was a building down there where new houses were being built. But 10 or 15 new houses, which were all in various stages of construction. So some of them had roofs, and some of them had all of them had walls, and some of them had just roof timber with timbers between the floors. And they were partly built, and almost none of them had glass windows and yet. They just had a rectangle in the bricks where the windows wouldn't be fitted. And there was cement around, and workman's tools had been left there overnight, so on and so forth. And I thought, well, okay, I'm here. I knew this was where I was supposed to be. Sounds very strange to describe to anybody who is not familiar with this phenomenon. And suddenly, just like that, it was 2.25 hours later, just like that. And I was surrounded by blue flashing lights, and blue and indigo, sort of royal blue and dark blue flashing lights, and this boom sound in my head, and this voice was telling me I'd had a sense of somebody behind me, but I knew that I wasn't hearing it to my ears. I was hearing it in my mind. It was saying, "You won't remember anything about this. You'll forget about it." Oh, and it was this very practical, deadpan statement of facts. It wasn't an instruction. You will forget about. It was just a statement of fact. You're going to forget it. Don't even think you're going to remember it. So it's like a chatty sort of statement of fact, and just telling me some information. And I looked through this rectangle in the wall and the brick where this window was going to be fitted, but it just no window, just no glass, just out into the open. And there was a flying saucer, and it was about 100 meters away, and it was about 30 meters, 30 degree elevation from the ground, and it was flying from my left to my right at an angle like that. It was just drifting like a leaf almost. And it wasn't like that. It was just on an angle. And it was just a classic flying saucer, a big flying disc. And it drifted away, and the lights, I knew the lights and the sound was to do with that. Well, actually, initially, for the first few seconds, I just thought, what's that doing there? And I didn't relate it to anything else, all these other strangeness that was happening. And suddenly, bang, it was gone. And all the lights were gone, and the noises were gone in my ears, and the flying saucer was gone. And I just thought, oh, crikey, is it at that time already? And it's 6 o'clock 2 minutes ago, and now it's 8:15. Where's the time gone? What have I been doing? And I know, I found myself, something said to me, oh, it's time to go now. And so I started walking home, and as I walked home, I felt this area of my face seemed to be wet and warm, and unnaturally so. And I put my finger on it, it was wet. And then I got home and looked in the bathroom mirror, and I had a perfectly round, circular mark, like a coin, like a big coin, had been stamped onto my face. It was just a big disc onto my face. It was like a burn. And it took 3 months to heal up. I mean, it healed up gradually. So I started weeping after an hour, obviously. And didn't tell anybody about it. And a couple of people noticed it and asked me about it. But I just said, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know how I did that. And people would look at you like, you don't know how you did that? No, I don't. I don't really, can't remember how it happened. And I'd actually forgotten the majority of the experience. It slips into the part of the memory which you don't have access to straight away, but you do remember over time. You think that experience in 1972, in that that Saturday morning, something weird about that. Something weird happened, and that mark on my face, and I gradually put it together over the years, and then I remembered the UFO, and one day, and I thought, why did I forget that? Why didn't I fail to remember that for all its time? Because it was there. I remember it. And I saw 1980s, and Bob Lazar came into the spotlight somewhat when he talked to George Knapp. He originally called himself Dennis, and he had drawn or had drawn or created an image of the UFO that he allegedly worked on at Area 51. And what he'd drawn was exactly the craft that I saw, one of that design. It was exactly the same, with a little antenna on the top and like a TV aerial, and the area of black rectangles around the outside of the cupola that looked like windows. I thought they were probably windows, but in fact, Lazar said they weren't windows, there was something else. But exactly the craft, that the image that he showed everybody was exactly what I saw in 1972. Exactly the same thing. So then I thought, well, I've obviously had some kind of alien abduction experience, because I knew about Whitty Strieber's book Communion by then. And he'd published that in 1987. And lots and lots of people read about that book, including loads of people who weren't abductees and weren't especially interested in the subject, because he had an extremely effective publisher who got a chat show campaign for him everywhere he went, including UK and Ireland. And he came over here in a there was a chat show which went out to several million people every evening on BBC. A guy called Terry Wogan used to host it. I think he's passed on now. And Ned Strieber on that. And we're listening to him. I was persuaded that there's no way that this was a fantasy. He was absolutely genuine. And what he felt about this experiences was, and what he related in that book was his attempt to explain exactly what happened, And only several years later, I got to know Whitney quite well, and he stays here with us sometimes. He was here a few weeks ago, and he's at Seoul Conference next week. And I was going to go with him, but in something else's car. So I've got to know him in subsequent years. That then I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he was a screenwriter and a successful novelist, and I just knew he'd written this book about aliens with fantastically memorable image on the cover, which used to freak people out. And a lot of people I knew who read it, bought it on its first run and read it. They couldn't put it down face upwards on the bedside table. They had to put it down face outwards, because they couldn't stand looking at that image, which was painted by somebody called Ted Jacobs under Whitley's direction. And, so I knew that alien abduction was a thing, and that it probably happened to somebody. I hoped and believed it didn't happen to me, but I thought this incident and it had in 1972 was something I never really forgot and never reconciled. But even having said that, I talked to almost nobody about it. Yeah, I talked to my first wife about it once, and she kind of sympathized with it, but she wouldn't know what to do with it. So it's just one of those things that you say, oh, when I was 12, this happened to me, and you listen, and that's the end of it. You just deal with them, with all the things the things you normally interact with. So we just put it on one side, and it always bothered me, that thing, and it always bothered me what it was. And I didn't really suspect there was another one. I just thought it was a one-off. But it was only later that I realized that, these are the things that happened in my childhood. And it's just that. And when I came to the realization, I realized that the alien abduction things that seem to be in the public domain, if you look for them, you could tick all the boxes, every single all right to me. And I was pretty anxious and depressed about it. Actually, I wasn't happy about this at all, and I didn't want to be one of those people, and I didn't want it to be happening to me, but it had done, and it is, and it was, and I had to adjust myself mentally to the fact that I've been in this program, because I think pretty much convinced it's a program, And when I finally got used to it, I started researching it at depth. That's when I started diving into the subject and contacting people like Bud Hopkins and other people in the field, and going out to meet them in the States, and I'd spent several weeks with the Bud Hopkins in his personal club during the last years of his life, and got doing extremely well. And David Jacobs, I worked with between 2009 and 2016 on once or twice a month. He used to have a session, and he used to come over to Europe occasionally, and he had friends in Cambridge. He and his wife are Larry, and they came over here for their wedding anniversary. I think it 2013 or 2014, and they visited us at Hampshire, and we got to know them extremely well. Now I visited them a number of times in Philadelphia and his house in Great West Lake, and this is the whole network of people that I built up, and I met a lot of abductees, and I interviewed a number of them at outlets, and their testimonies are woven into Out of Time, in the narrative about Out of Time. So I was always trying to find out what this thing is, where it comes from, what's going on, why they're doing this to us, and what it's a very odd sort of set of things that abductees experience. That they feel that many of them say they feel like they're a bit special or a bit different to the people, but they don't feel good about it, and they feel that there's a future. There's going to be a big change happening, and when it happens, somehow they will know what to do, because they will know about this, and they have the periods of missing time where they can't remember where they were or who they were with or what they were doing, and no matter how they try. And they have sometimes they have blinding headaches, and they're particularly over one eye rather than the other in their sinuses. And sometimes these last for 36 hours, and killers, normal painkillers have no effect on them. And then they finally subside. And I think this is to do with the implants being periodically removed and replaced. That's what I think. And that they sometimes they're very attractive and quite successful in life, but they never feel like they're successful, and they never really feel that they want to be in the public eye, and then a lot of them have a very great trouble forming relationships. I mean, they're considered quite attractive, both the men and the women, some of them, and they just never seem to settle down with anybody. They just never seem to. They always something seems to say, a few women have told me this, that if they feel like they settle down with a boyfriend and move in with them, and they know that it will interfere with something. If they do that, it will interfere with something. This is something that psychologists would grapple with, and if they were possessed to it. But there are all these the 35 different things that I've identified that I've listed Out of Time, which are markers of an abductee. And they don't all necessarily apply to every single abductee, but most of them will apply to most abductees.
So you've got an implant and you've got this burn mark, but you also have a scoop mark on your shoulder.
Yeah, that's happened, and I've been with my current partner. We're married now, but we've been together since 2008. And when we've just been together a short time, I got out of the shower one day, and she said, "Steve, what's that on your shoulder?" I said, "What?" Because it was on the back of my shoulder. You don't really, unless you have eyes in a very strange position, you can't see the back of your shoulder. And she said, "That looks like one of those scoop marks that I've seen in books about UFO abductions. I've seen them on this Discovery Channel. It looks like one of those, and you've got one." So she photographed it. And I don't think we had cameras in the cell phones in 2008. Maybe we did, but she photographed it with a camera, I think. We sent the images to some of the people I'd linked up in the States. because we'd met at a UFO conference, and I'd been to a couple of Steve Bassett's conferences, which he used to hold in Gaithersburg, Maryland, in Gaithersburg, Hilton. And I met Ed Mitchell and all sorts of people there. The Apollo 14 astronaut. I met Richard Dolan 2 or 3 times in those times, and all kinds of people. And I'd made friends with Peter Robbins, who's way back in 2008, and we established a regular kind of email chat and exchange phone numbers and so forth. And so one of the people we sent the photographs of the scoop marks who was Peter, and he happened to be working he worked for several years as Bud Hopkins' assistant, as administrative assistant, and he was very prominent in, although Peter's not an Abductee himself, his sister was, and Bud had worked with her before she passed away at 50 of I think reason I can't understand all this. But so Bud and Peter was quite close to Bud, and he was quite close to Peter and his family. So Bud had not been particularly responsive to my attempts to reach out to him, because he got bombarded by thousands of messages and letters all the time. And Peter just showed him these marks, scoop mark scars set to him by this guy in England that he met at a UFO conference a couple of years earlier. And Bud happened to be the subject of a documentary series being filmed by was it Breakthrough Films, and they also had a Manhattan studio, and they had Breakthrough Films as published it's helped Leslie Kane with you know who Leslie Kane is. She was Bud Hopkins' partner, but she's very prominent in the disclosure agreement, and she was one of the 3 authors, co-authors for the New York Times article published in 2017 on the front page of the New York Times about Black Monday and the Pentagon having this huge budget to covertly research the UFO subject. This New York Times article was very important in kicking off the whole congressional hearings in that campaign. So she, Breakthrough Films were working with Leslie over a book called UFOs, Pilots, Generals. Hiya. Thank you. Restaurant service.
Hi, sorry.
This is Nia. Yeah.
Hi, nice
Hi
to
there.
meet you.
That's Janice Burke, by the way, who photographed the scoop mask way back in 2008. And she's still there. But this Breakthrough Films film company was working to make a documentary film about Bud Hopkins and his partner Leslie Kane. And they were involved in the UFO issue in different ways. Bud had written 4 books by that time and about his abduction research, which most people in the field, in the interested in the field, preliminary would have read. And Leslie had written a book called UFOs, Pilots, Generals, and I can't remember what the third category was. So those kind of people go on the record, and whistleblowers sort of stuff, and go on the record, and it's a big seller because it had a mainstream publisher like it might have been one of the 5 big publishing group, and they set up she was interviewed by Stephen Colbert and by people like that, and Rob John Stewart and all these people at chat shows, Judy Kimmel, and so she was on all those programs, and they were in making a film about her work with these pilots and generals government officials who go on record, and also buzzword because they lived together, or they lived at adjacent apartments around the corner, and they were both interested in this, and they were both kind of public figures. And Bud was a very well-known author, and had done thousands and thousands of media hours, and had done hundreds of presentations, conference presentations by then. Published these 4 books. Intruders, in particular, was a very big seller. The second one, and so the Breakthrough Films Company wanted to find a couple of abductees who have these scoop marks that has never been researched or photographed or biopsied and before. Nobody, medical authorities ever looked at them. And Ethan Robbins happened to present these photographs to Bud Hopkins. My scoop mark just coincided with this particular project. So I was at home one night in my Hertfordshire house, and Bud Hopkins just phoned me up on the telephone, on a landline. I said, hi, is that Steve Aspin? I said, yes. She said, my name's Bud Hopkins, and I wonder if you'd like to come out to New York City and have that scoop mark biopsy examined and biopsied. We'll pay all the costs and so forth. You can stay in my place, and you can have my apartment to yourself, and I'll stay around the corner, and you'll be here for about a week, and you'll be interviewed on camera, and we'll do this and that. And he said, would you be interested in doing that? And I said, yeah, sure. I'll do that. So that's how we first came into contact and got to know each other in December 2008. So there's a lot of interview material from that project, which wasn't completed because Bud Hopkins got sick in 2010 to 2011, and he passed away in August 2011, and the project wasn't completed or released for not because the other thing was Breakthrough made a film about Joan Rivers, the comedian Joan Rivers, and it was called A Piece of Work, and it won the Sundance Award at the Sundance Film Festival. So they got sidetracked by that because it was hugely more interesting to a wider audience of people than this project. So this kind of got put on the back burner, and it eventually got overtaken by other things. So that film involving my scoop mark scar, a cinematic release, didn't come about. But do you know Breakthrough Film around La Ruelle in Montreal? No? Okay, because you're French Canadian, I thought you may do that because they're La Ruelle are quite campaigning film company. It means do you speak French? Yeah, so La Ruelle is the alley, the back alley, and so they dig into areas that people don't normally go into, and they made they've been 2 directors, Guillaume Maoist and Eric Ruel, which is the same as La Ruelle, co-directors, and they have his film crew, and they make these campaigning films, and I just thought you might know them because they're Quebec outfit, and they make half their films in French, and a lot of them have a cinematic release in French, and but they're making a film which features my work, which is due to be released in 2026, and they were out in it last year to film a debate between myself and a guy called Christopher French, who is an emeritus professor of psychology at Goldsmiths University in London. And the debate was set up by the psychology departments at University of Southampton, and we went down there and debated in front of an audience full of fairly hostile psychology students and physics students and undergrads and postgrad students and all the faculty members. That the place is so packed that people were standing at the back, and I won the debate. So the students were persuaded that the alien abduction subject is an empirical scientific phenomenon which is real and not imagined, because French was arguing that it's imaginary. It can be explained by anomalistic psychology, and I argue that it's not something that can be explained by anomalistic psychology. It's something that empirically happens in the real world to people. And I managed to persuade the audience of my points of view. So this debate features in the film, this new film that doesn't have a title yet, has a working title.
I forgot to ask you this earlier on. Regarding your childhood at home, did any things supernatural happen, like poltergeist or ghost activity?
Not in a major way, I mean minor ways, yeah. But there's something called the Jot phenomenon, which is an acronym for just one of those things. And it's when things disappear and you can't find them. And then they appear several days later or a week later, and they're right in front of you. And we've still have that going on here, Janice and I. We still have instances of that here. And it happened to me once when I was about to go on an international trip, and I couldn't find that passport. I couldn't find it. So just before the last moment I had, I was frantic. The last note I had before the flight was due to leave. I had to get the airport on time, and I just found it on the desk, lying face up on the desk, and it wasn't there now. It wasn't there the day before, but it was there just before the flight. So, it's that phenomenon, that JOTC, just one of those things. And it's something that nobody can really explain satisfactorily. It's been acknowledged as a thing and studied, but those kind of things happen to us quite a lot. And my mum used to say they take cutlery and they take things from the house, and sometimes they come back, this cutlery reappears again in the drawer, and it wasn't there yesterday. And she couldn't make any sense about it. I couldn't make any sense of it either. But those things happen to the Dan. Because she was a spiritualist, she later became a member of the Association of Spiritual Healers of Great Britain, and she belonged to the Spiritual Association of Great Britain, which is based in London. And she was always into those kind of mediums and crystal ball gaze, and the prophetic cards and things. She was very, very drawn to those, very interested. I mean, she was very down to earth as well. She's a very good homekeeper, and she works as a part-time and sometimes full-time as a school teacher, teaching teenage girls secretarial skills. So she was very grounded, as well as being very mystically inclined. But there's this mixture of things, going on in the household all the time. And none of my friends had this stuff going on. None of, I never talked about, almost never talked about that. I mean, sometimes we talked about space and aliens, because in the 60s, the TV channels and the comic books were full of aliens, spacecraft and stuff. So we talked about that, but that was kind of in the future. That was kind of future casting, and where we might be in years from now, in 2025, which was way in the future, what the world might be like then, whether we would have aliens living with us, whether we would all be flying to the moon in saucer-shaped craft and living there, that kind of stuff. But there weren't everyday things that, this happened to me yesterday. And I just don't understand. They're not that level of thing. They were more, sci-fi stuff.
In what year did you stumble upon a cattle mutilation?
I was even younger. In 1970, I went to Southwest Island as well, and I didn't know it was a cattle mutilation, because there's no such thing in England in 1970. There was no information about that sort. And I remind younger viewers of this podcast, if there are any, that there was no internet before about the 2000 or in the mid 90s. And there was nothing in the 1970s. There were just TV channels. There were just like 2 or 3 TV channels. That was it. And well, there wasn't even the menu of stuff that had been available on cable television for decades. None of that was there. And nobody knew about this. I was staying on a farm in County Kerry, about 2 or 3 miles from the sea. And we used to help bring the cattle in at night, take them out in the morning, and we rode horses because they had horses on the farm. And one morning after breakfast, I was 14 at the time, and the 12-year-old kid who was a farmer's kid came up to me, sidled up to me after breakfast and said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." And so he took me outside, and my sister was with us on holiday as well, and she was more his age, and he didn't invite her to this particular, whatever we were going to do. And he led me over the crest of the hill and down a valley for about 10 minutes walking, and he didn't say much on the walk. And then we came into this field, this twin enclosure, and there was a cow lying on its back, obviously dead, with its 4 legs sticking up rigidly like that. Now, when cows die, they're flat. They don't have their legs sticking out rigid, but their legs would stick out rigid. And there was a part of its jawbone cut away, with the jawbone visible, and one of its eyes was gouged out, like somebody taken in great big heavy ice cream scoop, and I set it out, I'll cut and remove the eye. And one of his ears had been cut off and it was missing. And at the back end of it, there's a whole great big cylinder called out in its rectum genital area, and massive, great big red cauterized channel going into this interior of the cow. And he said, the vet's been out to see this morning, and the vet says that the cow has died of anthrax. Now, I didn't know anything about anthrax at that point when I was 14, but I later learned that it's a spore that is not very contagious, but it's very very dangerous, and if you catch it, almost always was fatal. And the spores can live in the earth for years without activating, and then they can be reactivating, and so it's a very dangerous pathogen. And if there had been an outbreak of anthrax in a farm in Southwest Ireland, the whole region would have been evacuated, and extreme measures would have been taken to eradicate it, or attempt to eradicate it. And it probably that farmland wouldn't have been used for decades until it would have just been quarantined. So I learned about, when I was an adult, that diagnosis was completely bogus, and the vet probably knew that the farmer wouldn't have a clue about what anthrax was, but he just needed to be told something. The cow's died of anthrax. That's why it looks that way. It's ear missing and eye missing and stuff. And it was only Linda Moulton Howe did a documentary, Strange Harvest, I think in the 1990s or 1980s. Was in the 1980s. For a TV channel, I can't remember who she's working for. And it was only when that phenomenon of cattle mutilations came into the public awareness at that time that I realized immediately that was what I've been looking for, looking at in County Kerry in 1970. That's what I saw. That cow had been mutilated in exactly those ways, and it was exactly one of those adults. And this is before anybody anywhere in the world knew anything about it as a thing. but it was, I mean, maybe a few farmers had experienced it and talked about it between each other, but they just didn't know what to make of it. And they're none of them, nobody associated with the activity of UFOs. Nobody put two things together. So what that's basically that's the story. That was something that happened in 1970 that I was taken to see. Only me, other guests in that place, nobody else. And I was told not to speak about it. Probably because the farmer didn't want the guests to be spooked and think there was some rampant disease on the farm. So they'd all bugger off, leave early. Probably. But, I don't know if anybody told me that. I just assumed that I've been told not to divulge what I'd seen. But everybody wanted me to see it for some reason. These people wanted me to see it. Make it up, you will. I was the only guest, and I was only 14. I was the only guest in the place, and there were about 20 or 30 people staying there in this big farm, and I was the only guest who was invited, coaxed out to see this and witnessed it and walked around it. And I was told that the farm dog wouldn't come near the cargo, and we had in a very frightened manner, and backed off and whined when we tried to get it to go in our carcass. And there's no blood on the ground, nothing. Just and the cow was found a long way from the herd. It was found outside the meadow in on the mountain, on the hillside, and it couldn't have got there. If it walked there, it couldn't have got there without being transported through gates, locked gates, and so forth. But that's where it was, upside down, dead, mutilated in this particular way. This location a mile or two from the meadow, from where it should be.
Did you ever figure out what type of beings you're involved with?
I met the two types of grey aliens predominantly. The small type and the taller type, and they do different things. They're designed for different functions. One time, and a being that looked like a big praying mantis is, I write about this enough time to in the book. They're very skinny. They're very thin, like an insect. Like if you've seen a ball praying mantis in terrestrial praying mantis, they're very, very thin bodied. Yeah, and they've got a big head with a big pear-shaped head with big eyes. It looked like that, but it was 8 feet tall. Sure. And it only appears to have 4 limbs, 2 arms like that. They're not quite like human arms, but they're the same position on the body, and then they've got 2 legs, which are very insect-like. And that one side, and people claim to have met reptilian aliens on their abductions. I never have, or never remember any. But many abductees claim that, and less so in recent years. But I think there's reasons for that as well, which is a very long story I go into about in the book over time. And many times, human-looking alien, which I put a second book out in a few weeks. It's in publication at the moment. So it's called Investigating the Impossible, and it's co-written by a professor of genetics and molecular biology in Germany called Dr. Andreas Luck, who we've cooperated on the book. And it's going to be in the shop probably by January, almost certainly by January. December going to be difficult, but because the publisher's really busy at this time of year. But in there, we investigate the whole thing of hybridization, whether it's possible from a genetic and molecular point of view, or what would be required if you were to try to hybridize with an extraterrestrial species. And one of the conclusions we come to, not the only one, but one of them, is that the hybrids that people reported interacting with them on in the everyday world are almost certainly transgenic, not true hybrid. The transgenic beings are those that are essentially human. So you take a human zygote and you run sperm and put them together in a petri dish, be alien according to the petri dish, and you gestate the fetus, and at the very early stage of the zygote, you introduce a set of genes into it which changes its behavior, orientation, and give you extra mental abilities. Then there's extremely complex genetics involved in it. So that's that one quarter of the book. Do with that. But I think I'll have interacted with hybrid, what I would call hybrids, but probably transgenic beings. In our sign, there are two drawings in different chapters. One drawing was in chapter 4, which was a being that visited me in a late in the evening in our old house in our Hertfordshire, and left 2 hairs behind. And one of the appendices is a forensic analysis of the 2 hairs that's being left behind by Microtrace LLC in Illinois. And the reports from that investigation is also in the book. Very interesting reading, thanks to. And the other image in the book is of a somebody after having had practiced the ability to recall with Professor Jacobs on a number of occasions. And I had a very particularly rewarding and successful session with him one time. And 2 days after that, I came out from work and I was thinking about a business issue. And I just lay down on the sofa, put my feet up, and I suddenly shot a bolt upright and yelled, because I saw in my mind's eye, vividly and clearly as I can see you now, or more vividly and clearly than I could be now, that this female, it was the black hair and a green dress and up to the neck, and very slightly built, but she was human, definitely human, really distinctive green eyes. Was right in front of me, and she was looking at my mind through my eye and reading my thoughts. And I knew this as a memory, a recent memory, from the past week or two. It was really recent, and it was so vivid, and I've drawn it in it, and that image appears in chapter 7, which is the book about my work with David Jacobs, and memory recall really is, and what hypnosis really is, what's going on there, what mechanisms are being used. And also chapter on it, I talk about the mind scan procedures that the large grey aliens, the taller grey aliens can exercise when they look into your eye and they twist their head around to get a focus, and they can't allow you to blink. Do they prevent you from moving the eyes with any neurological control? What's going on in the mind scan and how that works neurologically, what the mechanisms are. That's all in chapter 7 too. So that's the only other chapter where there's an image of a quote hybrid unquote. I haven't got a photograph of one, but I haven't drawn one. So everybody knows what a grey alien looks like, so I haven't put any images of the grey aliens in the books, because you can find them all over the place, and lots of them are quite accurate. Some less so, but there might be more than one species, but the ones I've interacted with all look the same, and some people claim to have interacted with aliens with bright eyes or pupils and irises and so forth, and all sorts of Nordics and reptilians and all kinds of exotic interactions people have or claim to have, and or remember or think they remember. And I just concentrated on the abduction program I've experienced this and I've learned about it because there's quite a lot of information about it which could be put together. And it's happening to literally hundreds of millions of people. I think there's about 400 million abductees in the population. 399 million of them don't know anything about it, don't know they're abductees. But they have this strange lives and they have those strange experiences. They have this secret lives going on and they don't talk about it, or they push it away and won't deal with it. But there's a small number of abductees which have realized that this is what's happening to them. Numbers of thousands and tens of thousands now. Yeah.
You said two images, one with uh like a wispy haired hybrid, and like one with like a female within I think a hangar, or perhaps a UFO.
I didn't realize that I'd done that. I'd forgotten that I'd done that. Yes, I did. The first one, your wispy, thin looking female, which was wearing a wig, actually, wearing a wig, which we didn't know that. So when she let the hair down, we only discovered that by microtrace analysis. We told us exactly how it was constructed, why it was. That happened in 2015, and I drew it the next day. And the second one, it was what I just described a couple of minutes ago, where this female was staring straight at me with the green eyes, the green dress. That was my tattoo. Draw. That's memory. Yeah, what I remembered. Because it's really vivid and stayed in my consciousness for ages now. And I couldn't get rid of it, actually. I had to draw it out. Just draw it out. Maybe come and get rid of it. It's really so. But it's very, very powerful. It's a very powerful image. Yeah.
Do you recall ever going through like a sort of medical examination on board a craft?
Not a full one, but some bits of it. Yeah, some bits of it. They use things that they stick in your synovial sinuses and access your ears through this. They don't puncture the eardrums. They go into your ears through the respiratory tract, basically, and they have instrumentation to do that. And do you know about Bruce Rapwano? A guy called Bruce Rapwano. He wrote a book called Dominion Lost. He's a physics, biology and physics guy. He has a long chapter on how they do that, how aliens access these areas of the synapse, and it's extremely detailed. It's a kind of, a lot of people find that book quite hard to read because he doesn't really hold back on the scientific jargon. He's a professional working assistant biologist, so he don't use the correct term, the medical term, which about it. And he does write in quite an academic style. So a lot of people don't find it quite a difficult read, but it's worth persisting with if you want to understand this.
So what happened really in 2006? You had a confrontational experience at a Sardinia hotel.
Yeah. I went to visit. I had excuse me, my microphone just stopped. I was managing director of a surgical innovations company for 20 years before I sold the shares in 2018. And in 2006, I went to visit a supplier who had a factory in Sardinia in a place called Iglesias, I think. Iglesias, which means literally in church in English. And I took my girlfriend at the time, who was with me at the time, and I also met up with one of my contractors who works very closely with the company, was a Dutch guy who looked after my quality management system and wrote the quality plan. So he understood the manufacturing far better than I did. I understood it quite well, but he really, really understood it. and he met up with us there. So there were three of us, myself, my girlfriend, and this guy from Holland. And the three of us drove up from, the airport is in the south of the country. And we drove up from there in a rental car all the way after staying the day at the factory and going out to lunch with the owner of the factory who was supplying me all these products I needed. And we drove up to a place called, is it Bastia? I can't remember the name of it. It doesn't matter where it was, but it's on the coast, on the north coast, on the northwest coast. And we got to the hotel at 1:45 because it was much the Sardinians are really big island, and we didn't realize how far it was. So although we traveled in May and the roads were really quiet in May, and maybe they're always quiet, but they were just all very little traffic. But the roads are very windy, and there's never no motorways or anything. Yeah, expressway, little road. So it was 1:45 before we got to this place, and we were all pretty tired. And we said to my Dutch colleague, he had to get up the next morning, and actually there must have been another airport in Sardinia, because we took him to that one. It was fairly close to this this town we stayed in. And we said we'd get up at 7:00 and we'd grab a quick bite and we'd just drive him to the airport and waving goodbye for his flight to Amsterdam. So what happened was we all slept in, even though he was in a different room to my girl and me. And we all slept in. So, and at 7:30, I woke up sitting on top of the bedclothes and with my back against the headboard, so sitting upright like that. And my companion was fast asleep underneath the bedclothes next to me, facing the other way, facing the wall. And I was sitting on, and in the room, as I remember waking up, and I probably was awake, but the memory was wiped. In the room were two grey aliens, like the small greys, who were about 3 foot tall, at least tall. And between them was my father, who had died 3 years earlier. And he was standing there and saying to me, "It's time to go, Steve." And it was his voice. "It's time to go, Steve." And these aliens, there was one on the left, one on the right, and one on the right, looking from their perspective, the right-handed one, looking from my perspective, the one on the left. He had in his hand, he had a kind of long, thin, looked like a metal. What it looked like was one of those old-fashioned car aerials from the 1970s, which you telescoped out and telescoped back again to go through a car wash or something, and telescoped out, and that received the sound. It looked like that, but it was in a shape of a letter H. But the two long parts were very, very close together, and the short bit to connect it to was very short. So they were really close together, and this letter H thing, it was in his hand, and he's holding it, and he had this great. The two aliens had the great big almond-shaped black eyes and tiny little, almost invisible mouths. And there's nothing. They're all basically a big bulbous head like a light bulb, and big eyes. Like the eyes are everything that you can see. That's the only thing you notice about them. And their bodies are really thin and scrawny. And so I thought, and they've slowly faded out and disappeared. And there was kind of a blue mist left in the room. And I stayed there like a cloud for 2 or 3 minutes. And then finally I woke my girl up, and I said, "Do you know what time it is?" What's her name? And she started panicking. This guy, our colleague, was going to miss his flight. So we got up hurriedly, packed hurriedly, and knocked on the door. And he woke up groggily at 7:35. at the same time as us. And none of our alarms would go off. None of our alarms. We have cell phones with alarms on. None of them have gone off, which is fairly bizarre when 3 alarms all set at the same time, none of them go off. But they didn't do that. They didn't do it. So something would switched them off or affected them. And I thought for a couple of years after this that my father, who had just died 3 years earlier, had come back to say, hi, I'm okay. I'm on the other side. I'm in the other world. I'm fine. And I thought it was a kind of afterlife visitation. What I didn't understand is what those ugly, skinny little creatures were doing there, because I recognize them as grey aliens from, the popular culture, because they've been quite, Spielberg's film in the 1970s, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, has shown them, and they've been featured in a number of comic books and so forth, and everybody knows what grey is supposed to look like. And I thought maybe they're in that place where he is. Maybe if there is a heaven, the other world, maybe they're there too. So are we all got like spirits of the same kind or something, and then we end up in the same place? And the only paradigm I could put on it was this was an afterlife visitation. It was only a year and a half later that I'd actually woke up to the abduction issues being a real thing flying to me. And that's another story in itself. Then I realized that there were probably the third alien, because they always work in threes to pick you up and put you back. The third one had projected this screen image in front of him of my dad, which he got out of my mind. Because I obviously had this memories on. And he got it out of my mind, and somehow they convinced me that I was looking at him. And it looked like him, absolutely looked like him. He was physically real, and his voice was like him. But I just think it was the third grade, you'd projected something. And I have had other instances of that during abductions, that the greys can fool you or try to fool you with images of close relatives and people you feel good with, and that they're accompanying you or they're with you, and they do that to calm you and to make sure you're not too resistant. I mean, it's not it's not, no, there's no malignant intention. They want somebody who's cooperative and is not going to get you in trouble, and they're quite happy for you to feel good about everything, and what they want to feel good about everything, and they sometimes do that. They sometimes take on the person that they project an image of a close relative. There's another example of that in the book, which I probably get to go into, but it's when I remember that's an example. That's what I think was this idea. It was an abduction, and this was the end of the abduction, and the three of them, always the three of them would pick you up and send you back. One of them made it itself look like my dad, and that's the impression I was left with. He's okay. He's still there. His spirit is alive. He's still there.
So let's talk about your book, Out of Time. Now, why did you choose that particular title for the book?
Because principally it's got more than one meaning, and it's very difficult to pin this phenomenon down. It means, I think, as far as the abduction program goes, I concluded this program, which is a beginning and a middle and an end. And I think the program is sufficiently advanced that now that we're at our time to do anything about it, I think we might have done something to arrest the progress of this, or at least identify what it was and publicize what's going on. But it's always coming up, and we can talk all day and night about the cover up that's been perpetrated and who's behind this, and what intentions there are behind the cover and so forth. So, but that's one meaning of enough time. The other meaning is these things are, the visitors are literally out of time. That there's something about them that there's an element that this getting into quantum theory, there's elements of them and their program, their interaction with us that doesn't seem to be subject to the same level of time that we observe in our 365 days a year kind of revolving ball here. And they appreciate time differently to what they have different levels of understanding of time. So they're out of time in that respect. I talk about this for a little bit because there's a lot involved in the writing. The book starts out with my story. What happens? There's certain things that happen to an abductee that are different in character. Like you have missing time episodes, and you have episodes when that you interacting with something and you can't really talk about it because people want to understand. And so the first chapter basically deals with my awakening to what has been really going on with me and what's responsible for all this. So that chapter was basically done before I started writing, because I had written was a chat with one of a book. It was just a thing that people used to ask me about, and I said, if you want to know about why I'm interested in the subject, I'll send you this. So I used to send it out to people like that. That's how I got to Timothy Good, because he responded to me and invited me to meet over to his house for the weekend, and we went there and we've had a very close friendship for many years. He's unfortunately seriously ill now, and he's 82, so he's at the time when you might leave us. But so there were people like Timothy who lived in South London, same as I did, for many years. So he wasn't that far away. I know, so he used to meet up with him here in Nick Pope, and Nick Pope and Tim Good and I used to meet up together as a fleet at a place in the Charing Cross Road, which used to dine at Brown's Diner, and you can go into a pub in St Martin's Lane and spend the evening there talking about all this stuff, And so I wrote that for those kind of people who were interested in knowing why I was interested in it and how much knowledge I had about it and how much I'd been able to record. And I was told a number of times, Bud Hoffman is so eager, and he said, "You're quite a writer yourself, you should write a writing, you should really push your book, that." And I said, that time I was, managing, a managing director of a surgical relations company, and didn't really want that kind of exposure at speed. That kind of weird, this guy, the weirdo thinks he's an abducted by aliens. He runs that company out, and you deal with them without staying there. And so I didn't want to risk compromising on a professional situation. So I kept it covert. I mean, people who I trusted knew about it, but I didn't go public about it, as being interviewed by you and 40 other people. And I just, so then I had other things that happened in the meantime, like the analysis of the hairs that we found in the house after the intrusion in 2015, and the analysis of the scoop mark that was carried out, the biopsy was carried out in the Manhattan Dermatological Clinic in December 2008. So I had all these things that were written up and were all official, and I just had to work out, and then worked with David Jacobs for 7 years and learned so much about working with David, not particularly from what he taught me, but from what we worked out together, because, I would turn things and the way I thought about certain things. And he'd been interested. We'd engaged with that and just discussed it, and long discussions about it. So I had all that knowledge and all that experience of this, and it was just bringing it all together into a cohesive thing that I could take to publisher and publish it, and it would come together as a book. I was actually afraid initially I wouldn't have enough material. But at the end, it was 134,000, 124,000 words, which is too long for a book. But I managed to prune it down to 115,000, which is still rather long. And the new book that I mentioned a bit earlier, Investigating the Impossible, is only 35,000 words, but it does include 80 different illustrations of biological processes, cellular processes, and genetic codes and data charts and so forth, and graphs. So it includes quite a lot of visual graphic information. So it's same length as the other one, but small pictures to look at. So that's how Out of Time came to being, and even right up until publication, I hesitated to publish it. I thought, well, I could keep the manuscript and maybe add to it over the years and just keep it, and just maybe somebody will publish it when I'm gone. And I was kind of pushed into it by a couple of people. Robert Hastings, who you may know who he is. He's a friend of ours, and then really known since 2010. We've known him really well. We visited him in New Mexico when he lived in New Mexico and in Colorado. When he moved to Colorado, and we were there last 24. With a number of people who you may know their names, but I won't list them because a couple of people don't really want to acknowledge their interest. They're mixing with abductees. And Robert stayed with us for Christmas many times, and he said, "Steve, you really ought to publish this right now. Really ought to do it." So it was pressure from those kind of people, and my wife, you'd sort of pop in and out half an hour ago, who actually found a scoop mark skull. Without her, I wouldn't have found it, and or never noticed it was there. And that led to my whole long association with Don Hopkins. That's our friendship, all the conversations together. So all these things came together, and I just decided I wouldn't write a book about my experiences. I would write a book about how my experiences, this phenomenon, taught me things that led me to investigate the phenomenon as it is, and write a book on what it's about. The 30 abductees who were interviewed for the book over the 15-year period, I woven their stories into the narrative, and say, this abductee said this, and this abductee, this happened to them. And it's beefed down the narrative and made it a bit more cohesive and made it more of a story. And the last chapter says, it's called They, in quotes, they. And it's who are they? Where do they come from? How do they get here? What are they doing? Where did this start? When's it going to end? And what are they up to? Yeah. And have they ever done this before? And where are they going? And all these questions were addressed in that. There's a question I ask in chapter 9. One of the questions is, are we being visited by other aliens? I say almost certainly. The Lorenz case in Russia and way back when, wherever it was, and the aerial school incidents, which may not be an abduction, classic abduction, even though it involved 50, 60 children in Zimbabwe in 1994. And there's all loads of instances that don't conform to the abduction narrative, but their interaction with things that are obviously not put here. So obviously, yes and yeah, but the thing about this particular abduction issue, the abduction program, is it's a program involving hundreds of millions of people, and it's been prosecuted covertly, and they take great pains to make sure they're not seen and their craft aren't seen, and the abductions are not witnessed, and people are returned in as quiet a way as possible, and they abduct people when they're at least being missed, and they how they do this on this gigantic scale is completely mind-boggling. How they've pulled it off and how they've kept it out of the public eye, or somebody's kept it out of the public eye, public knowledge. It should be huge, but it's not. It's not. So that book, we set out to address through this whole range of issues of trying to build a cohesive story about Rabbit, which I think is been very successful. So the book's been very successful, not far more than I thought it would be. So
One final question before we log off. Why you? Why your family?
that's another question that I ask. Complicated. I can only say what some researchers assess me was they think it's probably originally might have just been random, and a certain percentage of the population were taken. And the one thing I do know is the initiation abductees, the origin abductees, were they're all young adults. They weren't babies. They were young adults at the start of the breeding cycle, and they were all abducted at that age. And give some examples of this in the book, but that some people I know were young adults at that time, and they started the program, and their kids were taken, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids, or one child at least. And researchers differ on their understanding of as to whether all the children of abductees are taken, or only one, or some of them. And I have no judgment about that, because I've talked to abductees who say they're the only one in the family, and I've talked to other abductees and it happens to my sister too, or what happens to my brother too. So I think it's very difficult to discern that with any certainty, and maybe even the abductors themselves might not know it. They might not understand all the nuances about what they're involved with, because if they're just workers, doing a job, they might have no curiosity about certain aspects of it. So, asking them, you won't necessarily go out to make it.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fun. I love you guys, and always a pleasure to have my second family from across the pond on my show. So thank you so much for coming on. And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's interview. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I will see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.